The Wright Brothers, How to Invent the Airplane, Part 3. The Wright Brothers are headed to North Carolina, and Wilbur gets there first, and he writes a letter to his father outlining how he plans to approach the problem of building a flying machine. And the letter that he writes to his father is simply incredible, okay? It's 2 stars. You know, if I was a VC today and somebody came to me and said, hey, I'm gonna invent the airplane and this is how I'm gonna do it, I would say, oh my gosh, that's a really good idea. So without further ado, let me read it to you. I have my machine nearly finished. It is not to have a motor, and it is not expected to fly in any true sense of the word. My idea is merely to experiment and practice with a view to solving the problem of equilibrium. I have plans which I hope to find much in advance of the methods tried by previous experimenters. When once a machine is under proper control, under all conditions, the motor problem will be quickly solved. Failure of the motor will then mean simply a slow descent and a safe landing instead of a direct disastrous fall. I don't know how many of you watching, if anyone, my mom, has ever tried to solve a problem for the first time, but you can't solve the entire problem at once. You have to break it down, and you have to do it systematically. What Wilbur is saying, once again, he's calling his shot. He says, I just want to solve equilibrium. I'm going to make a glider. I'm not going to worry about a motor. I'm not going to worry about making a true flying machine. I'm just going to build a glider. And I'm going to learn how to glide it. I'm going to get control of it under all conditions. I'm going to understand that glider. And only then will I start worrying about a motor, which I think will be pretty easy. Because if the motor fails, which motors often did in 1901, what are you left with? A glider that you know how to use and control. Another thing that Wilbur writes to his father in terms of risk is that he says, quote, the man who wishes to keep at the problem long enough to really learn anything positively must not take dangerous risks. Carelessness and overconfidence are usually more dangerous than deliberately accepted risk. Yes. Whether it's finance, you know, are you going to buy this stock or not? Whether it's engineering, you know, am I going to build this airplane in this way or not? You're always going to have to take some risk it for the biscuit, but they need to be deliberate and understood, okay? You know, Nassim Taleb has this great tweet on investing, which basically says, if you want to be successful as an investor, don't blow up. And the best way to know to not blow up is to understand how you could blow up. So to make money, to build a flying machine, you have to take risks, but you have to know what risks you are taking, and you have to be deliberate about it. Carelessness and overconfidence will screw anybody in any domain, no matter what it is. Another kind of key aspect to inventing the airplane. So in this anecdote, they have their glider, their first machine, and McCollough writes, once, after they set the glider on the ground to make adjustments, a sudden gust caught one corner and quicker than thought threw it 20 feet, smashing it to pieces. Orville, who had been standing at a rear corner holding one of the upright spars, was yanked off his feet and landed in a heap 20 feet away, shaken but unharmed. So their glider's destroyed. You just got thrown 20 feet, and what do? They dragged all of the debris back to camp and talked of heading home, but after a night's sleep, they decided that there was hope. Repairing the damage took 3 days. So one of the reoccurring themes in this book and in life is you cannot be easily dissuaded from what it is you're trying to do. You always have to sleep it off and wake up with hope, whether it's making a YouTube video that nobody watches. I don't really care, you know? I make these, I think they're fun. Nobody watches them, except mom. Hi, mom. But I don't really let that get me down. I just make another one the very next day, and I enjoy doing that. And they did the same thing with the airplane. They get a little bit down on themselves, and next thing you know, they just repair the damage over 3 days, and they go back and try again. And that's going to be a running theme through this book on how to invent the airplane, which is persistence and optimism, no matter what happens. This doesn't really have to do with inventing the airplane, but I thought it was kind of a funny anecdote. It's just like in the North, Orville explained, where our carpenters never have their houses completed, nor the painters their houses painted. The fisherman never has any fish. So they're just making an observation of the world, which is people who want to sell you something or do something for you generally don't do it for themselves. You know, think of in today's parlance, that would be the life coach who wants to give you life advice but has a terrible life themselves. Everything's a mess, and they're telling you to do something without actually doing it themselves. Yeah, that's no different than it was in 1901. I thought that was funny. Anyway, so this is not quite a hot take, but obviously one of the things that you need when you're doing anything is hard work. Hard work will always increase your chances of success. So did the Wright brothers work hard? Well, let me explain it to you from the words of John T. Daniels. Hard workers were greatly admired, and in the words of John T. Daniels, the Wright brothers were 2 of the workingest boys ever seen, and when they worked, they worked. They had their whole heart and soul in what they were doing. So Wilbur had closed a letter to his father, saying it would be no great disappointment to him were he to accomplish practically nothing there. He considered it a pleasure trip, And with characteristic understatement, Wilbur summarized by saying that they were able to return home without having our pet theories completely knocked in the head by the hard logic of experience and our own brains dashed out in the bargain. He said nothing of the fact that for the first time he had experienced the thrill of flying. So I like this, and this stood out to me in particular because one of the ways you can trick yourself into staying positive and being optimistic is not getting your hopes too high. So clearly he's saying, we're approaching this trip to North Carolina as a pleasure trip. We're not expecting to solve every problem, and we're not expecting to have everything go perfectly and come back with the flying machine. We want to try out some theories that we had in real life, and that's huge. That's kind of how you keep yourself sane, is you just understand, hey, like, I'm just trying to do one little thing. I hope to get something out of it, but it's okay if I don't. And I love that he called out, the hard logic of experience, because we all have ideas, and the question is, how does that translate to real life? Another thing that I find important for inventing the airplane is you need a solid support system. So in part one, we talked about having like a family to support you. But obviously the Wright brothers ran a business. They had a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, and you need someone reliable to help you there and to count on while you stop your work there and you focus on the flying machine in this case. So in chapter 3, Charlie Taylor, is introduced, and he works at the bike shop for the brothers. One of the things that McCollough writes of him is, of all those who were to enter the lives of the brothers, few were to prove such value as Charlie Taylor. He was a great machinist, and he was a reliable guy who they could trust to run the store during the less busy season for them so that they could go to Kitty Hawk and, build their flying machine. So that's something you need to invent the airplane. You need someone to watch your six and make sure that things are taken care of when you're focusing on the problem at hand. Alright, so this has absolutely nothing to do with inventing the airplane, but it's, tangent alert. It's an awesome anecdote about the mosquitoes in the Outer Banks. Now, I don't know, I haven't been to the Outer Banks. I know people go there often. I actually live pretty close. I don't know if this is still true, but the mosquito problem that they had in 1901 is incredible. And I'll just read you directly from this book. Something I can barely wrap my head around. It says, among the long-standing summer visitors to Nag's Head, the old wisdom was that the infamous Outer Bank skeeters struck en masse only once every 10 or 12 years. On July 18th, it suddenly became clear 1901 was one of those years. As Orville wrote, the mosquitoes appeared in the form of a mighty cloud almost darkening the sky. It was by far the worst experience of his life, he would tell Catherine, his sister. The agonies of typhoid fever were as nothing by comparison. There was no way of escaping the mosquitoes. The sand and the grass and the trees and the hills and everything was fairly covered with them. They chewed us clear through our underwear and socks. Lumps began swelling up all over my body like hen's egg. Misery. Orville vowed that come morning they would head for home. But by morning, however, their characteristic resolve returned. Demon mosquitoes had diminished appreciably, and in the days to come grew fewer still. But the torment they had been through would never be forgotten. So that is insane. Okay, I'm speechless that people could subject themselves to such torture with mosquitoes. One mosquito bite drives me nuts. They're comparing this to typhoid fever, which they also got, and they're saying it's worse. Okay, I've never had typhoid fever. Also sounds horrible. I guess everyone in 1901 kind of dealt with this, but just the fact that they had to suffer through these mosquitoes and still kind of focus on inventing the airplane and just stick it out is incredible. I'm so soft compared to these guys. Okay, so back to how to invent the airplane. This particular series of passages is very telling, and there's a lot to unpack, but I'll start with this. The Wright brothers have come back to Kitty Hawk, and they're trying out a new glider. And McCollough writes, to all present but Wilbur and Orville, this flight seemed a huge success. To the brothers, it was a disappointment. The machine had not performed as expected, not, in fact, as well as the one the year before. Wilbur had to use the full power of the rudder to keep from plowing into the ground or rising so high as to lose headway. Something was radically wrong. The adjustments of the machine are a way off, Orville explained to Catherine. The curvature or camber of the wings from the leading edges to the rear was too great and had to be changed. It was this that concerned them most. The ideal camber or curve of the wing from its leading to its trailing edge being that which gave the wing the most lift against the pull of gravity. What was so troubling was that the ratio they had gone by was exactly what Lilienthal had recommended, about 1 to 12, whereas their glider the year before, machine number 1, the brothers had used a ratio of 1 to 22. It was not just that their machine had performed so poorly, or that so much still remained to be solved, but that so many of the long-established, supposedly reliable calculations and tables prepared by the likes of Lilienthal, Langley, and Chanute, data the brothers had taken as gospel, had proven to be wrong and could no longer be trusted. Clearly, those esteemed authorities had been guessing, groping in the dark. The accepted tables were, in a word, worthless. That 4 out of 5 stars. Probably should be 5 stars. This paragraph is so true. We live in an age of information. There's Wikipedia, there's citing. This hasn't changed at all, okay? People grope in the dark, esteemed authorities guess, and people take it as gospel, and they just assume that it will work, and it doesn't work. You can't rely on other people. You can't claim that, oh, something's going to be easy. I'll just have someone else figure out this part and I'll do this part. You have to do everything yourself, and the Wright brothers do. You should always assume that when somebody's telling you something who's an authority, they're just groping in the dark, and they actually don't know what they're talking about. And the only way to figure out the truth is to do it yourself. So I'll end on that.